Unaware his poor, abandoned ex is now married to a duke, he kicked her at the bar. The Laughing Lion was the kind of establishment respectable people didn't visit, which made it perfect for privacy. Mara Ellings sat at the worn bar nursing a gin that she hadn't actually drunk, waiting for Mrs. Pruitt to finish her meeting in the back room. The older widow had helped Mara years ago when she'd had nothing, and Mara never forgot debts like that. The door banged open. Loud voices, expensive coats, the particular arrogance of men who thought the world owed them audience. Mara didn't look up. She'd learned years ago that invisibility was a survival skill. Then she heard his voice. Well, look what poverty dragged in. Mara's spine went rigid. She knew that voice. Had loved that voice once, back when it whispered promises instead of mockery. Cecil Crown stood 3 feet away, flanked by 2 friends who clearly thought themselves hilarious. He'd aged poorly. His face had gone soft around the edges, his eyes harder. He wore wealth-like armor, every button and cufflink announcing his importance. Mara Ellings, Cecil said loudly, ensuring everyone in the bar heard. Still haunting cheap establishments, I see. Some things never change. Mara set down her glass carefully, her hands steady through force of will. Hello, Cecil. Hello, Cecil, he mimicked in a high voice. His friends laughed on cue. God, you're still pathetic. Still nursing drinks you can't afford, I'd wager. Before Mara could respond, Cecil's foot shot out, connecting with her stool leg. The impact jolted her forward, her gin spilling across the bar, the liquid running onto her sleeve. The bar went quiet. This wasn't friendly teasing. This was deliberate humiliation, public and cruel. Mara steadied herself, wiping gin from her wrist with a handkerchief. Her face stayed composed even as shame burned through her chest. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this story of an unexpected partnership born from obligation, tap like, leave a quick comment, and subscribe so YouTube knows to bring you more stories you'll enjoy. And if you're up for it, tell me your first name or where you're watching from in the comments. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. If you needed a stage, Cecil, she said quietly, still underneath the calm, you could have rented one. Cecil's smile sharpened. Still pretending you have dignity? Darling, dignity requires means. What do you have? This. He gestured at the bar, at her simple dress, at everything about her that screamed ordinary. You're still nothing. Just like you were when I left you. Mrs. Pruitt appeared from the back room, her elderly face flushed with fury. She moved to Mara's side, her hand protective on Mara's shoulder. That's enough, Mr. Crown, Mrs. Pruitt said, her voice carrying decades of authority. Oh, the old charity woman. Cecil's lip curled. Still collecting strays, I see. Tell me, Mara, does she pay you for companionship, or are you still just accepting handouts? Mara felt something crack inside her, not breaking, but realigning. She'd spent 6 years rebuilding herself from the ruins Cecil left behind. She would not let him demolish her again with words and public spectacle. I'm not here for you, Cecil, Mara said, standing slowly. I'm here on business. Business. Cecil laughed, the sound ugly. What business could you possibly have? Unless the charity is hiring for laundry again. You were always good at washing other people's linens. His friends erupted in laughter. Several bar patrons looked away uncomfortably, not quite willing to intervene but clearly disturbed by the cruelty. Mara reached for her reticule, preparing to leave. Staying meant enduring more humiliation, and she'd had enough humiliation for 10 lifetimes. Running away again? Cecil called. That's right. Run. You'll always be the girl I left behind. Mara turned, meeting his eyes directly. Then you left in the dark, Cecil. You never knew me at all. She moved toward the door, Mrs. Pruitt beside her, when Mara noticed something odd. A well-dressed footman stood in the doorway, scanning the room with purposeful intensity. His livery was expensive, too expensive for this neighborhood, too expensive for casual errands. Mrs. Pruitt noticed too. Her hand tightened on Mara's arm, and something passed across her face. Recognition? Concern? Before Mara could ask, Cecil's voice cut through the bar one final time. You'll always be nothing, Mara, Remember that when you're scrubbing floors and pretending you're better than you are. Mara didn't respond. She walked toward the door with her head high, her dignity intact despite the gin staining her sleeve and the humiliation burning in her chest. Behind her, Cecil laughed with his friends, victorious in his cruelty. The footman's eyes found Mara. He straightened slightly, as though confirming something. And the door swung open to the cold London evening. 1. The footman fell into step beside Mara as she and Mrs. Pruitt exited the bar. His presence was quiet but unmistakable, trained, professional, utterly out of place in this rough neighborhood. "Madam," he said softly, "the carriage is waiting 2 streets over. His Grace thought you might prefer discretion." Mrs. Pruitt squeezed Mara's arm. "I'll see you tomorrow, dear. Go on." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to insist on walking home to her modest rooms above the charity office. But exhaustion and humiliation made decisions difficult, so she simply nodded. As they walked, Mara's mind drifted to the story she'd spent 6 years trying to forget. She'd been 22 when she met Cecil Crown. He'd been charming, handsome, seemingly genuine. He'd courted her properly, met her father, spoken of marriage and futures and all the things young women were taught to hope for. Then her father died. The debts appeared like vultures, circling the small house and modest savings. Her father had been a clerk, respectable but never wealthy. His death revealed the precarious foundation their life had rested on. Cecil had visited once after the funeral. Sat in their parlor. Looked at the shabby furniture with new eyes. "Mara," he'd said carefully, "I need to be practical. My family expects, that is, I cannot." He'd left that day and married someone else within 6 months. Someone with money and connections and no debts trailing behind her like ghosts. Mara had survived by working. First in a laundry, standing over steaming water until her hands cracked and bled. Then, because she'd always had a head for numbers, in accounts for a textile merchant. She'd learned budgeting not from books but from necessity, stretching shillings until they screamed. She'd become careful. Private. Built walls high enough that men like Cecil couldn't climb them again. The carriage appeared ahead, elegant and expensive in a neighborhood where carriages meant debt collectors. The footman handed her up. Inside, Mara sank into velvet seats and let herself feel, just for a moment, the weight of exhaustion and old grief. She wasn't here for Cecil. She'd come to the Laughing Lion to meet Mrs. Pruitt because the older woman had been too ill to travel to the charity office. They'd needed to discuss accounts for the women's kitchen Mara helped fund, a place where women who'd lost everything could get a meal and sometimes find work. Mara had been one of those women once. She never forgot. The carriage rolled through London streets as night deepened. Mara stared out the window, seeing her reflection ghost-like in the glass. She'd thought she was done with Cecil's chapter. Thought she'd closed that book and buried it. Apparently, some men refused to stay buried. Back at the Laughing Lion, Cecil was celebrating his victory. His friends clapped him on the back, ordered more drinks, congratulated him on putting her in her place. God, the look on her face, one friend laughed. Priceless. She always did think she was better than she was, Cecil said, downing whiskey. Needed reminding. The bartender, a grizzled man named Burke who'd seen everything twice, wiped glasses without comment. But his expression suggested he'd seen men like Cecil before, and they rarely aged well. Some men age like milk, Burke muttered. Mrs. Pruitt, who'd stayed for one more drink to settle her nerves, heard. And still demand respect like wine. Cecil was too drunk on triumph to notice their disapproval. He leaned back in his chair, expansive and loud. You know what the best part was? She actually thought she could sit there with dignity. Like she had anything worth respecting. He laughed. Poor, abandoned Mara. Still nothing after all these years. His friends laughed along, but one of them, a younger man named Peters, looked uncomfortable. Bit harsh, wasn't it? Kicking her stool? Harsh. Cecil's eyes flashed. You don't know what she put me through. Years of my life, Peters. My best years, wasted on a girl with nothing to offer. I deserved better. You left her, Mrs. Pruitt said coldly from her corner. When her father died and she needed help, you ran. I made a sensible choice, Cecil snapped. Not everyone can afford sentimentality. No, Mrs. Pruitt agreed, standing slowly. Some of us just can't afford decency. She left before Cecil could respond, her disgust evident in every line of her rigid back. Cecil watched her go, then turned back to his friends, his good mood slightly dampened. Old women and their charity cases. Thank God I escaped that trap. The bar settled into uneasy normalcy. Drinks flowed. Conversations resumed. But the mood had soured, the cruelty leaving a residue that even alcohol couldn't wash away. An hour later, as Cecil prepared to leave, he noticed Mara's reticule still sitting at the bar. She'd left it in her haste to escape. Cecil picked it up, weighing it thoughtfully. It was cheap leather, well worn. Inside would be what? A few coins. A handkerchief. Evidence of the poverty he'd always known she'd fall into. He opened it, curiosity overcoming propriety. A folded letter fell out. Cecil caught it, recognizing official stationery. He unfolded it despite knowing he shouldn't. It was a receipt for a charitable donation. A significant £1.200 to the Women's Kitchen Fund. More money than Mara should have been able to spare from any work he could imagine her doing. Cecil frowned. How could she afford? The door opened. The well-dressed footman from earlier stood in the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found Cecil. Sir, the footman said, approaching with professional courtesy, I believe you have something that belongs to my mistress. Your mistress? Cecil laughed. You mean poor Mara? Tell her she can collect her pennies tomorrow. The Duchess prefers her belongings returned promptly. The bar went silent. Cecil stared. What did you say? The Duchess of Halewick, the footman repeated clearly, would like her reticule returned. Cecil felt the floor tilt slightly under his feet. Duchess. Don't be absurd. That was Mara Ellings. That was Mara Vale, Duchess of Halewick. And you, sir, put your hands on her. The footman's tone remained perfectly polite, but the words landed like stones. Cecil's mind raced, rejecting, recalculating. Mara? A duchess? Impossible. She'd been nothing. Poor, abandoned, broken. But the footman's livery was real. The carriage outside was real. And suddenly Cecil remembered the way Mara had spoken, not with the desperate voice of poverty, but with the steady certainty of someone who'd survived worse than his mockery. There's been a mistake, Cecil managed. The only mistake, sir, was yours. The Duchess will collect her belongings tomorrow. Good evening. The footman took the reticule with careful courtesy and left. Cecil stood frozen, his friends staring, the bar's attention heavy on his shoulders. Burke the bartender spoke into the silence, his voice carrying clearly, some men age like milk. And everyone in the bar suddenly understood exactly what he meant. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe, it helps me bring you more stories you'd love. 2. Mara sat in the drawing room of the Halewick townhouse, still wearing her gin-stained dress, staring at nothing. The elegant room, all silk wallpaper and carefully chosen art, felt surreal after the Laughing Lion's rough charm. Adrian Vale, Duke of Halewick, found her there an hour after her return. He was 37, measured in a way that suggested thought before action, with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes that missed very little. Thomas said you encountered trouble, Adrian said, sitting beside her without waiting for invitation. They'd been married 18 months. He'd learned not to hover, but he'd never learned indifference. Not trouble exactly. Mara's voice came out steadier than she felt. Just the past catching up. Tell me. So she did. The whole story tumbled out, Cecil's mockery, the kicked stool, the public humiliation. She left nothing out, including her own shame at still feeling small in front of a man who'd abandoned her 6 years ago. Adrian listened without interrupting, his face growing progressively colder. He put his hands on you. Just the stool. And my wrist briefly when I tried to leave. Mara touched the spot unconsciously. No bruise, but the memory pressed like one. It wasn't violent, just controlling. That's violence, Adrian said quietly. Control is violence. Mara had married Adrian Vale a year and a half ago, but not because of a fairy tale. Their meeting had been practical, almost mundane. Adrian needed someone to help organize his charitable foundations, the accounts were a disaster, overseen by well-meaning people with no head for numbers. Mara had been recommended by Mrs. Pruitt, who'd known the Duke through relief work. Mara had impressed him with competence first. She'd reorganized the foundation books in 3 months, finding waste and redirecting funds to places they'd actually help. She'd been professional, efficient, and utterly uninterested in his title, which had, apparently, fascinated him. "You don't treat me like a duke," Adrian had said once, 6 months into her employment. "Would you like me to?" "God, no. It's refreshing." They'd become friends before anything else. Talked about work, about the frustrating inefficiency of charitable systems, about books and ideas and futures. Adrian had been married before, briefly and badly. His first wife had wanted the title and nothing of the man underneath. She died of fever 3 years into the marriage, leaving Adrian wary of anything resembling romantic attachment. But he'd proposed to Mara anyway. Practically. "I think we'd be good partners," he'd said over tea in his study, as though proposing business merger. "We work well together. We respect each other. Neither of us expects grand passion, but we could build something steady." Mara had considered it carefully. Marriage to a duke meant security she'd never imagined. It meant power to help people who'd been where she'd been. It meant never being poor and desperate again. But more than that, it meant Adrian, who was kind without being soft, intelligent without being condescending, and who'd never once made her feel small. "Yes," she'd said. "I think we'd be good partners." They'd been right. The marriage worked because they'd built it on foundation rather than feeling. Respect first. Trust earned slowly. Something that felt more solid than the passionate promises Cecil had once made and broken. Now, sitting in their drawing room with gin staining her sleeve and humiliation burning in her chest, Mara felt the foundation hold. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to bring scandal into our house." "You brought nothing." "He did." Adrian's voice carried steel underneath the calm. "And he will answer for it." "Adrian, please. Making a scene will only make this worse. You know how society works, they'll say I'm causing drama, trying to get revenge on an old lover. Then let them say it. I won't have my wife treated like something to wipe mud on." "Your wife," Mara repeated softly. "Sometimes I still can't quite believe that's real." Adrian's expression softened. He took her hand carefully. "It's real. You're my wife because I wanted you to be, not because I needed anything from you. You understand that. Most days. And today. Today I feel like the girl Cecil left behind. Poor, abandoned Mara who couldn't keep a man. That man wasn't worth keeping." Adrian squeezed her hand. "And you're not that girl anymore. You're the woman who rebuilt herself from nothing. Who runs charitable foundations better than people who've done it for decades. Who stands in bars and speaks with dignity even when being humiliated." He paused. "You're my partner, Mara. My equal. And I will not tolerate anyone treating you as less." Mara felt tears threaten but held them back. She'd cried enough over Cecil Crown. She wouldn't give him more. The next morning, gossip arrived faster than breakfast. Cecil, humiliated by the footman's revelation, had apparently run to his circle with a different story. The whispers spread through London's drawing rooms like fire through dry grass. Mara had tricked the Duke. Seduced him for his money. She'd been nothing before, a laundrywoman, a charity case, and now she was playing Duchess while laughing at everyone who knew her true origins. The damage was swift and realistic. Not complete ruin, Mara was, after all, an actual Duchess with an actual Duke defending her. But enough to sting. Enough to matter. Lady Pemberton withdrew her support from the Women's Kitchen Fund, citing concerns about moral character. Lord Ashford suggested perhaps the Duke had been deceived about his wife's true nature. 2 other charitable patrons sent polite notes asking for clarification before committing further funds. The Women's Kitchen, the place that fed 30 women daily, the place that had once fed Mara when she had nothing, suddenly faced closure if the charitable committee withdrew support. Mara read the letters in Adrian's study, her hands shaking with fury. "He's destroying the kitchen because he's embarrassed," she said, her voice tight. "Women will go hungry because Cecil Crown kicked a stool and got caught. Then we fight back," Adrian said simply. "How?" If I defend myself, they'll say I'm dramatic. If you defend me, they'll say you're being manipulated. We can't win against gossip, Adrian. You know that. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then, what if you didn't defend yourself? What if you just told the truth? In public, where people have to witness it. They won't believe me. Then make them believe you. Not by begging. By showing them exactly who you are. Mara looked at him, seeing the certainty in his face. The belief. Not blind faith, but earned trust. The charitable committee meets in 3 days, she said slowly. A salon gathering to determine funding allocation. Will Cecil be there? His family supports several charities. He'll be there. Adrian smiled, not warmly. Perfect. Mara felt something shift inside her. She'd spent 6 years being careful, being small, protecting herself from men who'd use her poverty as weapon. But she wasn't poor anymore. She wasn't powerless anymore. She was the Duchess of Halewick, and she had a women's kitchen to save. Then I won't hide, she said. I'll face it properly. I'll tell my story, and if they choose to believe him over me, that's their shame, not mine. Adrian took her hand. I'll stand beside you. You don't have to. Partners, he interrupted gently. That's what we agreed. You don't face anything alone anymore. Mara felt tears finally fall, but they weren't shame this time. They were relief. Gratitude. The peculiar strength that came from finally trusting someone to stay. Then let's go save a kitchen, she said. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. 3. The charitable committee gathering was held at Lady Thornhill's elegant townhouse, in a drawing room designed to intimidate. Expensive art covered every wall. Crystal chandeliers caught afternoon light and scattered it like judgment. 40 of London's most influential charitable patrons gathered, dressed in their finest, ready to decide which causes deserved support. Mara entered on Adrian's arm, wearing a dress of deep blue silk that Mrs. Gale had insisted made her look properly ducal. Her hair was pinned simply but elegantly. She wore Adrian's mother's pearls, not her own, but ones freely given, symbolizing acceptance. The room noticed immediately. Conversations paused. Eyes tracked Mara's progress. The gossip had done its work. Everyone knew there was drama to witness. Cecil stood near the refreshments, surrounded by his usual circle. He dressed carefully, projecting confidence and respectability. When he saw Mara, his face arranged itself in practiced sympathy, as though preparing to play the victim of her deception. Lady Thornhill, the committee's chair, called the gathering to order. Various causes were discussed: orphanages, hospitals, relief funds. Everything proceeded with polite efficiency until they reached the Women's Kitchen Fund. There has been some concern, Lady Thornhill said carefully, regarding the fund's management and the character of those involved. Mara felt Adrian tense beside her. She squeezed his hand once, steady, not desperate, and stood. May I speak to those concerns, Lady Thornhill? If you feel it necessary, Your Grace. Mara moved to the center of the room, where everyone could see her clearly. Her heart hammered, but her voice emerged steady. 6 years ago, I was poor. My father had died, leaving debts I couldn't pay. I worked in a laundry to survive, standing over steaming water 12 hours a day. Later, I found work doing accounts because I had a head for numbers. I built a modest life through work, not deception. The room listened, some faces sympathetic, others skeptical. During that time, I was courted by a man who promised marriage. When my father died and the debts appeared, that man left. He chose security over loyalty, which was his right. I don't fault him for leaving. She paused, meeting eyes around the room. I fault him for kicking my stool in a public house 3 days ago to humiliate me, then spreading lies when he discovered I'd rebuilt my life. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Cecil's face darkened. That's not, he started. I'm not finished, Mara said clearly, and something in her voice made him stop. I didn't trick anyone into marriage. The Duke hired me to manage his charitable accounts because I was good at numbers. We built a partnership based on work and respect. When he proposed, it was because we respected each other, not because I deceived him. She turned to address the committee directly. The Women's Kitchen Fund feeds 30 women daily. Women who've lost husbands, lost homes, lost everything. Women who were where I was 6 years ago, desperate and trying to survive. If you withdraw funding because of gossip and lies, those women will suffer. Not me. I'll still eat. But they might not. Lady Pemberton spoke up, her voice sharp. Your Grace, it's not just gossip. You were seen in a public house of questionable reputation. Meeting Mrs. Pruitt, who helped save my life when I had nothing, Mara interrupted. She was too ill to travel, so I went to her. That's where Cecil Crown found me and decided public humiliation was appropriate entertainment. She's lying, Cecil said loudly, trying to paint me as the villain to hide her own opportunism. Am I? Mara turned to face him directly. Then explain the kicked stool. Explain grabbing my wrist when I tried to leave. Explain running to your friends afterward to laugh about putting me in my place. Cecil's face flushed. You're twisting. I'm stating facts. Mara's voice stayed calm, controlled. You kicked my stool hard enough to spill my drink. Multiple witnesses saw it. The bartender, Mrs. Pruitt, several patrons. Would you like me to bring them here to testify? The room's attention shifted to Cecil, waiting for his response. Before he could speak, Mrs. Pruitt herself entered the drawing room. She'd been invited as a representative of the kitchen's work, though Mara hadn't known she'd attend. The elderly widow moved slowly to stand beside Mara. I was there, Mrs. Pruitt said clearly. I saw Mr. Crown kick the Duchess's stool. I saw him grab her wrist. I heard him call her nothing repeatedly. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was cruelty. Burke the bartender appeared behind Mrs. Pruitt, looking deeply uncomfortable in such elegant surroundings but determined. I saw it too, Your Grace. Deliberate and mean. The sort of thing that makes a man's character clear. Cecil stared at them, his confidence cracking. You're all conspiring. To tell the truth. Adrian stood now, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Mr. Crown, you put your hands on my wife. You humiliated her publicly. And when that humiliation backfired, you tried to destroy her reputation and the charitable work she supports. Did you think there would be no consequences? I have rights. So does she, Adrian said coldly. And I will defend them. You will apologize. Publicly. Clearly. Or I will ensure every door in London closes to you. I won't threaten violence. I won't need to. I'll simply make certain that everyone knows exactly who you are. The room was utterly silent. This wasn't melodrama. This was power, applied with surgical precision. Cecil looked around the room, seeing faces that had been friendly now carefully neutral. Lady Thornhill watched him with cold eyes. Lord Ashford, who'd questioned Mara's character yesterday, now looked embarrassed by his hasty judgment. Cecil stopped, his practiced charm failing him. I may have been harsh. Not good enough, Mrs. Pruitt said flatly. Apologize properly, or confirm to everyone here that you're exactly what we think you are. Cecil's face worked through several emotions: anger, humiliation, trapped fury. Finally, he forced out words that clearly tasted like poison. I apologize for my behavior at the Laughing Lion. It was inappropriate. And for spreading lies about the Duchess afterward. Lady Thornhill prompted. And for exaggerating certain circumstances. Exaggerating, Mara repeated softly. Is that what we're calling lies now? Cecil's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, defeated. Lady Thornhill turned to the committee. I believe we've heard sufficient clarification. All in favour of continuing full support for the Women's Kitchen Fund? Hands rose around the room. Not everyone, some held grudges or prejudices too deep to shift, but enough. More than enough. The vote passed. Mara felt her knees weaken slightly. Adrian's hand found her back, steadying without smothering. Thank you, she said to the committee. The women who depend on the kitchen thank you. As people began to disperse, conversations resuming in clusters, Cecil tried to slip toward the door. Adrian intercepted him smoothly. Mr. Crown, Adrian said quietly, so only Cecil and Mara could hear, you're fortunate my wife has more grace than you deserve. If you ever approach her again, if you ever speak her name in anything but respectful tones, I will not be so controlled. Do we understand each other? Cecil looked between them, Adrian's steel-wrapped calm, Mara's quiet strength, and understood he'd lost completely. Yes, he muttered. Excellent. Good afternoon. Cecil left like a man escaping rather than departing with dignity. Mrs. Pruitt squeezed Mara's hand as they prepared to leave. Look at you, the elderly woman said, her eyes bright with tears and pride. Same girl, just finally treated like a human being. Mara felt her own tears threaten. Thank you for coming. For speaking up. Child, you saved my life when I needed help, then saved 30 others. You think I wouldn't fight for you? Mrs. Pruitt smiled. Besides, watching that pompous fool forced to apologize was the most fun I've had in months. 4. The carriage ride home was quiet. Adrian sat beside Mara, not touching but present, giving her space to process. I was terrified, Mara admitted finally. You didn't show it. I learned how to hide fear. Years of practice. You shouldn't have to hide anything. Not anymore. Adrian turned to face her. Mara, you understand what you did today? You didn't just defend yourself. You protected 30 women who can't defend themselves. You stood in front of London's charitable elite and made them choose between gossip and truth. That's not hiding. That's courage. I just didn't want the kitchen to close. Because you remember being hungry. Because you remember what it means to have nowhere to go. Adrian's voice softened. That's why you're so good at this work. Not because you studied it, but because you lived it. Mara leaned against him, exhaustion finally catching up. Do you ever regret marrying me? The complications I bring? Never. Not once. He pressed a kiss to her hair. You make me better, Mara. More aware. More useful. I was a duke doing charitable work because it was expected. You showed me how to do it because it matters. Partners, Mara murmured, echoing their first agreement. Partners, Adrian confirmed. That evening, alone in their private sitting room, Mara wrote a letter to the women's kitchen managers confirming continued funding. She detailed new initiatives, job training, childcare support, literacy classes. The kitchen would grow, not just survive. Adrian found her there, ink-stained and determined, planning futures for women who'd thought they had none. You're remarkable, he said, not for the first time. I'm just trying to pay forward what Mrs. Pruitt gave me. A chance. You're giving more than chances. You're giving dignity. Mara set down her pen, looking at this man who'd married her for practical reasons and somehow given her everything Cecil's promises never delivered. Security, yes. But more respect, partnership, the freedom to be fully herself without pretending or performing. Adrian, she said quietly, I need to tell you something. What? When we married, you said we didn't need grand passion. That respect and partnership were enough. I remember. I think you were wrong. Mara stood, moving to him. Not about respect and partnership, those are still foundation. But I think we've built something more. Something that looks suspiciously like love. Adrian's expression transformed, hope and joy breaking through his careful control. You think so? I know so. I love you, Adrian Vale. Not because you're a duke. Not because you saved me from Cecil's humiliation. Because you treat me like I matter. Because you made space for me to become more than I thought I could be. Because you're my partner in the truest sense. Adrian pulled her close, his arms steady and sure. I've loved you for months. I just didn't want to pressure you. Didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything. I don't owe you. I choose you. They kissed, tender and certain, building on foundation that had become more. Weeks later, Mara stood in the women's kitchen watching volunteers serve meals. The space had grown, additional tables, more volunteers, new programs launching. Women who'd come hungry now returned to help others. One young woman, thin and tired, reminded Mara sharply of herself 6 years ago. She approached carefully. First time here? Mara asked gently. The woman nodded, shame and desperation warring on her face. I've nowhere else to go. My husband died, left debts. I've been working but it's not enough. Then you're in the right place. Mara guided her to a table. Eat first. Then we'll talk about what comes next. Work, housing, whatever you need. Why? The woman's voice broke. Why would you help me? Because someone helped me when I had nothing. And because you deserve more than surviving. You deserve living. As the woman ate, tears streaming down her face with relief, Mrs. Pruitt appeared at Mara's side. You've built something beautiful here, the elderly woman said. We built it, Mara corrected. You started this kitchen. I just helped it grow. No, dear. I started a place that fed bodies. You made it a place that feeds dignity. Mrs. Pruitt smiled. That's the difference. That evening, back at the townhouse, Adrian found Mara in the library reading letters from kitchen volunteers. She looked content in a way she never had during their first months of marriage, settled, certain, home. What are you thinking? He asked. That I'm grateful Cecil kicked that stool. Adrian blinked. That's not the response I expected. If he hadn't, I would have kept hiding. Kept pretending my past didn't exist, that I was just the Duchess playing a role. Mara set down the letters. But facing him, facing the gossip, defending the kitchen, it forced me to claim all of myself. The girl who scrubbed laundry and the woman who runs foundations. Both parts matter. Both parts are me. Both parts are remarkable. And both parts love you. Mara smiled. Even the scared parts that didn't think love was safe anymore. Adrian crossed to her, pulling her close. Love is always a risk. But some risks are worth everything. 6 months after the charitable committee confrontation, Mara received an unexpected letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the name at the bottom made her pause. It was from Cecil's sister, Margaret, whom Mara had met briefly during their courtship years ago. Your Grace, the letter read, I hope you'll forgive the presumption of writing. I wanted you to know that my brother has left London. The shame of his behavior at the committee was too great to overcome socially. He's gone to manage family properties in Yorkshire. But that's not why I'm writing. I'm writing to apologize for remaining silent all those years ago when Cecil abandoned you. I knew it was wrong. I knew you'd been kind and genuine. But I said nothing because family loyalty seemed more important than truth. I was wrong. Watching you defend yourself and those women with such dignity taught me something about real strength. I've begun volunteering at a charitable kitchen in my own district, inspired by your example. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Margaret Crown. Mara read the letter twice, feeling something old and bitter finally release its grip. Not forgiveness exactly, Cecil's cruelty still stung, but something close. Release. Moving forward instead of carrying weight backward. She showed the letter to Adrian that evening. Will you write back? He asked. I think so. Not for Cecil's sake. For hers. She's trying to do better. That deserves acknowledgement. You're generous. I'm practical, Mara corrected. Holding grudges takes energy I'd rather spend elsewhere. Adrian smiled, that particular smile reserved only for her. Have I mentioned recently that I love you? Not in the last hour. Terrible neglect. Then let me remedy that. He pulled her close, his voice warm against her ear. I love you, Mara Vale. I love your strength and your practical heart and the way you turn pain into purpose. I love that you saved my charitable foundations from chaos and my life from loneliness. I love. Mara kissed him, stopping the words because she could feel them in his touch, his presence, the steady certainty of 18 months that had become forever. I love you too, she said when they parted. My partner. My Duke. My home. They stood together in the library as evening light faded to darkness, two people who'd found each other not through passion or drama but through work and respect that had grown into something deeper. Outside, London continued its noise and gossip and endless social calculations. But inside the Halewick townhouse, Mara had everything she'd thought lost 6 years ago: security, purpose, love given freely rather than promised emptily. Cecil Crown had kicked her stool thinking she was nothing, not knowing she'd become everything. Not because of the Duke's title or wealth, but because she'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that her worth wasn't defined by who stayed or left, but by who she'd become when she stood back up. And she'd stood. Strong, steady, and finally, completely home.